Just to alert our sensitive viewers, this episode may contain a bit of coarse language.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christy Blumendahl.
And my name is Rocco Catroni, and we are the Disability Tangent Podcast.
Each episode, we talk about current issues affecting communities while supporting people with disabilities.
Through research, community connections, and resource sharing, we hope to invite everybody to challenge their perceptions of people with disabilities and promote a more inclusive world.
Defined by what the people actually want and not what others think they want.
Come join us on this journey. In today's episode, we embark on a fascinating journey with two remarkable guests, Dr. Robin Arnall and Alexandra Vassar.
Join us as we delve into the unique experiences of being autistic clinicians and researchers.
Get ready for insightful conversations that shine a light on the intersection of disability and behavioral practice.
Without further ado, let's dive in. And we are here. We are started. We are the champions. Except for my face. My face is not the champion because it is not showing.
Oh no. It's happening again.
Oh no.
It was
and then
so
I hit
good.
record.
It was not good.
Okay, what about now?
Say a
You want me to
soliloquy,
what?
like
Quote
a
some
little bit more, and then
Shakespeare?
you
That's
can-
not really gonna happen. I can make something up, or I can be like saying some dirty limericks or something, but I don't really have a lot of Shakespeare in my repertoire.
It's skipping on my
Maybe
end again.
we just need to not do
Yeah.
just quit altogether. Just like, oh, never mind. This podcast was a great idea. We had like 100 and some downloads with our first episode, but you know,
We're retiring early, folks.
maybe we're just
Lowering
gonna
the
be
bandwidth on-
audio only forever. I literally took a shower for this.
Nobody has to take a shower. I'm surprised I have pants on today. That's
I was just gonna
You
say,
also don't
like, pants
necessarily
are-
need that
I
remotely.
prefer
That's
people wear
true.
pants, just or that I don't know whether or not they're wearing pants because I feel like it might be distracting for me. Clothes.
pants.
I
hate
also
clothes.
hate clothes.
sense
Yeah.
I
of
should
health.
have recognized that
do it.
my
Yeah.
daughter had some form of autism when she was very small because she would come home from preschool and immediately strip off all of her clothing. And I just was like, she doesn't like clothes.
that's
But now I'm realizing I also
Well,
would hate
if you
clothes.
also-
That makes sense. You get home, you strip everything off. Like, I would prefer that. But I'm an adult, so I have to wear clothes.
Some
Yeah,
people aren't that way
apparently.
somehow. Some people like. Well, I like how clothes look
mm-hmm,
sometimes. Not on me, and the feeling is awful.
mm-hmm.
So when
Even if
I'm
I
going
like
through the store, the first thing I do is feel the clothes.
Yeah.
I don't look at the clothes first. I go through the racks and touch
Yeah.
them.
Yep.
And that's how
Yeah.
I find things.
Oh yeah. And I
Me too.
and I have to try it on because like I've had where it's like, oh yeah, that suit looks really good. This is a really nice button down. Awesome. I put it on. I'm like, I would die
Yes. Yeah.
if I had to.
It was interesting to
Yeah.
me because I watch the Fab Five, Queer Eye. I love
Mhm.
Jonathan.
Jonathan.
They had this episode, and it was about a person who is deaf, and they had to try on the clothes and test for dexterity with their. I'm waving my arms as though you can see me, but they had a test for dexterity with their arms because for signing they had to have a particular amount of flexibility in the arms, so they couldn't wear like a suit, which had never occurred to me before. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's why we need to have cross disability discussions. I want it for this reason, but it needs to be adaptable for all these other reasons. And if we all got together and talked about how it needed to be accessible and adaptable, we might have more discussion because we'd have more people who were looking for the same types of change in the industry. Yeah.
Agreed. Well, I think the close thing actually kind of
Like a good start. Why don't you
transitions really well
introduce
to what we're
our
talking about today.
fabulous guests, Rocco? That probably was something we should have started with. Let's go with that. We started on a
So we get to this-
tangent.
oh,
we
man.
can do a tangent
Check us out for
before
more
the
details.
episode starts. We are that good.
We live up to the name. Alrighty, so today we are talking about what it means to be an individual with a disability identity in the professional world. What kinds of things have happened in our own trainings? What are we working with now? I don't want to say through or barriers because obviously those things exist, but we're still living. And this is still something that we try to factor into our everyday lives. So I will have Robin and Alexandra introduce themselves. Robin, if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. I'm Robin Arnall. I am a professor of behavior analysis with the Russell Sage College Behavior Analytic Program. And I also adjunct for the Chicago School in their ABA program. I do a lot of research on the side. I'm dual diagnosed as autistic with ADHD. I also have some physical, I guess you could say, issues that I'm trying to navigate around as well. And I was late diagnosed. I was diagnosed at 37 years old. So just a couple of years ago for me. We're not going to actually count up the age, though. I would prefer not to do that.
Fair. No, that's perfect.
Okay.
I'm Alexandra Elfers, legally still Vassar, but I'm going colloquially by my family name at this point. Non-binary human. I've been in the mental health, psych survivor, Mad Pride movement before before identifying autism on board, and that explained so much. I was diagnosed officially maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but self-diagnosed much earlier than that. Just a male psychiatrist saying that a non-male adult couldn't possibly be autistic, and got some physical stuff on board as well. Multiply disabled. I have a walker in the back of my car for longer walk periods, unless there's a cart at a store, that kind of thing. I gotta have support. But I'm also a crisis management person. It's a fun combo.
Good job.
Off the cuff, not my strength.
It's those open-ended questions that get us, I feel.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good point. I feel like that sometimes too of what to fill in, and then sometimes I tend to overfill, and other
Right.
times under, depending on the situation. So I can empathize with that. Yeah. One thing that I wanted to start off with was maybe the four of us can just share our personal journeys. I know, Christy, you and I have talked about this a little bit in our introduction podcast, but Robin and Alexandra, can you talk about what has your personal journey been? How did you get into this field? Like, why is this something that you continue to go through? What kinds of things did you jump in? Just anything you want to talk about, how you would describe your path from, I want to be a behavior analyst, to now.
I can go ahead and go, and
Cool.
if you're wanting me to jump
Sorry.
in. So, yeah, personal journey. Oof. So a lot of what Alexandra described in their introduction really hit home. And I forget about some of the little bumps and issues along the way that have come to where I am now. I was in college for theater, and then I switched around majors several times. I ended up with sociology, really liked studying human behavior, and found myself in a job that was providing support for families with children who were diagnosed with autism. And I really liked it. And it dabbled into behavior analysis, but it didn't go full, we can help you get certified, we can do some supervision. So I ended up finding clinic-based models that I could work at to gain some of that experience. Really enjoyed the objectivity of behavior analysis as an autistic person. I think that really speaks to me because the clear definitions, the clear descriptions, and technological descriptors of procedures really made sense. And if I can't see it, then I can't measure it and I can't do the thing. It just makes sense. And I started doing more with that. But the more I worked with autistic children, the more I found that I empathized and related with them, probably a little too much than my coworkers. And so I similarly went to male psychiatrists, just my own personal experience. And this was, I want to say, like my mid 20s. And I was told there's no way that I could be autistic because I drove a car and I held a job and I could live independently. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, and I had mentioned this on another podcast before, but that should have been a huge red flag to me because I always believed that my clients could do all of those things, regardless of their
Mhm.
diagnosis. And yet I internalized that toward myself. And I was like, oh, that's okay. You're right. I couldn't be, right? But instead, I started collecting acronyms and collecting labels, which a lot of late diagnosed autistic and gender nonconforming individuals seem to be doing. So I collected like OCD, I collected generalized anxiety, I collected CPTSD, like all these different diagnoses until I got through my doctorate and started teaching and actually found a neuropsychologist who, after 10 years or so of this and diving into autistic advocacy and kind of reform work of ABA, I found an individual who right off the bat diagnosed me as autistic and was just like, no, it makes total sense. We've come a long way with diagnoses and it just doesn't look the same for everyone. And while very validating, there's still a lot of cognitive dissonance that I struggle with on that. But I attribute that to being 37 when finally being told, hey, you're not being ridiculous. These are valid experiences. Yeah, at this point, I just try to continue to find my own identity in disability. I continue to advocate and I just try to educate students who I work with about culture and how we can embed those things into our culture. So yeah, that's about me.
I just want to say, like, when, if it's okay to piggyback a tiny bit, like when you and I first met, Robin, told me that you were autistic, and I'm like, that explains how quickly you caught on to reform
Right.
so much, because you didn't seem to go through the same cognitive dissonance in that community at that time. That was an interesting microcosm. But anyway,
Yes.
that's the middle of the story for me. So I studied physics. I did not intend to work with people. Uh, I wanted to be an experimental like scientist working like my undergraduate thesis was in quantum dots, which I will not explain right now because I probably would butcher it. It's been a hot minute. Is but I left, and like a lot of autistic people, I was in and out of various jobs. I worked in different things in education. I worked in China for a brief period teaching English, came back, and then like teaching wasn't working for me, so I shifted and went into accounting because heck, I'm good with numbers and hated that. At this time, I was in and out of psych stays for a period of time, and that's where I encountered that psychiatrist. I wasn't seeking diagnosis necessarily. I was on hold against my will, and the psychiatric nurse practitioner is the one who initially suggested in my early 20s that autism was likely the thing on board, and she was overruled. And then I was put on a wild regiment of chemical restraint for the next several years of my life. And really, it's just been in the last 6 months that I've fully woken up from that stupor. Like, it's taken, like, I've crawled out of it in stages, but my introduction into ABA specifically, and looking back, my mom was very proud of her like psych minors in psych worth of classes, and you bet when she took those classes in the 90s that covered a fair bit of ABA. I didn't have traditional ABA in a clinic setting, but my mom believes she fixed me with her minors worth of psych courses. That's my younger exposure to it because I can see exactly what my mom did then in what I know now. But I stumbled in as a BT thinking, hey, I'm on my way to an IT degree because I am just so done with trying without, I don't know, I was stumbling along. And then I started working with autistic people, and I'm like, wait a minute, you're my people. And at this time, I'm doing extensive therapy, trying to survive the psych world because it's not wanting me to stay alive very much. And like really fell in love with being around, hey, they're my people. They're my kin, you know, my population. And same, Robin, like I understood far better than a lot of other people that I was working around. And I didn't know the controversy in ABA right away, but as soon as I started, like, I got to a point in removing the chemical restraint piece that I started seeing other psychiatrists and psychologists and things, and trying to find somebody who would listen to me and do an actual evaluation, and started looking at what does the autistic community think of ABA, and I did not find what I was expecting. And when you get new information, you change your opinion because our opinions are not factual, right? You learn better, you do better. And so I was still in my master's program early on when that happened, and when I started investigating and getting into the autistic community itself. And I stayed in it because clearly I'm good at analysis, so I might as well be a squeaky wheel in systems that need support to do less harm. And so that sometimes I get real tired. But,
Yeah.
you know.
No, it absolutely
I
did.
don't know if that
And
made any sense.
I feel like I understand a lot of that feeling. I felt that way about the religious community for a really long time, where, yeah, as I became trained more and more in seminary, I started to see, oh, no, religion is about being a better person. It's not about adhering to some sort of dogma. And all of these holy books are about becoming
Mhm.
a better human, to treat other humans with more respect and compassion and love. And then I would go back to this religious community that I was raised in, and I wasn't seeing more compassion and more love. And I stayed for a really long time in that community because I felt like maybe I can affect change in this community, and this will be the thing that I can assist with. And I think in some ways I did, but at some point it became too burdensome for me to remain in that community. And I had to leave that community because I didn't see the change that I wanted to see. So I think that makes a lot of sense that, you know, there are times when you say, look, I'm going to stay inside this system and work at things from within. And then there are other times when you're like, nope, the system isn't working, you know, we need to burn it down. And so I think, not literally, please don't literally burn things down, and don't say I told you to. Don't literally burn them down.
Good call.
No,
Figuratively burn them down.
but also, even if a system needs
Yes.
proverbial burning
Right.
down, there are
Yes.
still people in the building.
Yeah.
So there's got to be people on the inside
Absolutely.
to safely get the people
Absolutely.
still in the building out
Mhm.
while it's being dismantled, reorganized, whatever is going on,
Yeah.
while the flooring
And sometimes all you
joists
can
and
do is,
foundation, whatever, are being
Mhm.
shored
yeah,
up.
and sometimes all you
There's
can do
gotta
is be
be
like,
people on the
fire
inside.
department, kick the door down, grab them and pull. So sometimes you have to kind of take people crying and screaming down the stairs,
Yep.
and that's what you
Yep.
got to do. But most of the time, I would prefer to do that with compassion
Yep.
and with kindness, and in this more like
Yep.
slow, honoring,
Yes.
respectful kind of way that
Absolutely.
says, hey, I get where you're coming from. Can you see where I'm coming from? And in this like beautiful discourse way. I was talking to, or not talking to, but I was messaging back and forth with a friend
Yeah.
earlier today because he was talking about the Black Panthers, of all things. He was like, oh, these are the images you see of the Black Panthers, right?
Mhm.
And this is what you automatically think is like Black men with guns. But did you realize that they did this, they did that? And he's listing off all of these great things that the Black Panthers put into the world, right? They basically started the foundations of the Women, Infants, and Children program, which gives food to pregnant women or people with uteruses that need extra supports, and young families that need extra supports, and all of these different things that they put into place, preschools and all of these great things. And I said, oh yes. And they also supported disabled people during these protests years back. And the passing of 504, which gave all of this access to people with disabilities, would not have happened without the support of, potentially, without the support of the Black Panthers. And he was like, oh, I didn't know that. And I was like, yes, you can watch the documentary Crip Camp. It has a lot of information about that, talks about the intersections. And it was just really great. And he said, I wish we had more of that. Like, why don't we do that today? Come together around the things that we all need and all care about. And I was like, absolutely. That's what I want too. And I feel like that positive discourse and being united around the things that we all want and not so focused on our differences would bring about a lot of positive change. Sorry, was that too much? That was very preacherly. I talked about religion class and then I got all on my horse. Woo!
It's not the content of this particular podcast, but I come from a church background and started seminary and flamed out real fast because disability, and
that's what I did with that's what I
Uh,
did at the Chicago
at
school.
the time. So that would be an interesting conversation. That's where I'm at now because I am ready to be back in school. But I get the religious stuff.
Yeah.
And I definitely I appreciate everybody's insight on that, where how do we create that change and how does that foster, but then also what is the effect of on us for that? Like at some point it's tiring of fighting the same battles, saying the same things. It's whatever the vocal version of, per my last email, as I said a million times before, trying to convince these systems to change has been really hard. So then I think in my own experience, then I try to do the like Buckminster Fuller thing and try to create a model that more people will gravitate towards and make the other models obsolete. But people have such a stranglehold on those other models, and they might have more of a financial component to that. And that links to survival for people. And I get why they do that. And it doesn't make it right. We can understand that. But listen, analysis is literally in our title here, right? So we can see that.
People don't have an excuse. So that's where it's a compromise. I use that word very purposefully. There are spaces where I am not going to tell a parent that because they are utilizing ABA or they're utilizing a specific system or they come from a specific background that they are a bad parent. That is not okay.
Exactly.
I may disagree. So I save my gentleness for parents and for their kids, but it's easy to be gentle with their kids. For me personally, it's harder to be gentler with fellow practitioners who have power. They may be vulnerable because they're worker and so therefore up for exploitation just like the rest of us in working employment situations, but at the same time there's degrees of compassion there. Like, you're choosing to wield power over kids for your own survival, and you don't have to survive that way. That is, to a degree, a choice. Maybe a choice based on limited information, but it's still a choice, and you stubbornly holding on to that choice, even when presented with alternative options to maintain your livelihood without exerting that control, which is what I see a lot of people doing, is they're like, no, this is the only way, because they can't hold on to that they can't work through that cognitive dissonance of possible harm caused in the past. And I'm like, no, better, do better. Don't, like, we can have that conversation, get a therapist, whatever you need to do, but there's that chokehold. So a great way to put it. I have a lot less patience for folks in that position, because I'm like, this is a choice. You don't have to practice that way.
And
Right,
you
it's
mentioned like it being a choice. And so the way I see it, there are two options. Like one is you hear the feedback that's being provided and you decide to make active steps to change what you're doing. Regardless, you're going to mess up. We're going to make mistakes, but you're actively trying to change the model and do things differently, or you're resistant to the information and you're defensive. And that is where I have the issue where we've had this discussion. You're fighting it. Like, I'm not saying I'm always right, but at the same time, I think what our area tends to lack in as far as our certification programs is
Yeah.
a discussion of power dynamics. And
Mhm.
Alexandra, you started to talk about wielding power and everything. And I challenge students in some of the work that they will do for my courses where it's tell me about the power dynamic in this plan that you're proposing. Okay, if it's not balanced as much as possible, reasonably within control of everything that you can do, knowing our tools in our field, then I want you to go back and re-examine it. And I don't know that there's ever really a lot of discussion about power, quote unquote, how we use it in this discussion. That is a big thing that I think we could start doing as a society, is really
Agreed.
being open and candid about what power looks like and what power dynamics can be. And once you put it in that perspective, students really grasp it, but I don't know how much of a discussion is happening about it.
Yeah,
And people are afraid of it.
exactly.
Right.
And I know that the APA recently put out, I think this was about a year ago at this point, where the American Psychological Association basically said, hey, folks, we effed up real bad. And we perpetuated a lot of these bad things, and it's showing up in our programs. And we need to fix this. What do we do next? And like, there are certifications, not all of them. Yeah, it's nice that they acknowledged,
Right. Also, we would
cool.
love feedback.
Exactly. Now the next 32 steps are up in the air.
Right.
So one of the things that they point to partially in this article, but then other conversations around this and spheres that I've been talking with, is simply having a class or simply having one conversation or going to one training. People, I think, have this conflated idea that, well, I did this one thing, I'm an expert in this now. Or, I had a diversity class, I know what DEI stands for. Awesome. And
right.
that's it. It becomes very prescriptive. And, oh, you took the class, you're good. Oh, you passed this test, awesome. But as we see, if you're not able to put those things into practice and you're not contacting those environments in a way that makes sense and you're not getting feedback, and, Robin, to your point, if you're not receiving that feedback, nothing ever really changes with that. And I think that's something that we keep running into. And with all four of our perspectives of being neurodivergent and trying to make those changes, we're waving our hands saying, hey, also think about it this way. I see what the science is. I understand that. Also, here's the other 15 considerations because I went through it too.
But lived experience is very easily thrown out as not scientific. And I'm like,
but it's social validity.
Where's our bedside manner? Like,
right.
Surgeons can't force a surgical plan on a patient. And if we want to claim to be a science, which I have feelings about given my particular science background, that I don't know is the right tangent for right now. I've had a professor try to fight me on that, and I'm like, sir, you do not have any hard science background in your CV anywhere. How about you sit down? Having the D attached to your title is given a particular flavor in this particular conversation.
Does it stand for doctor or something else?
I will.
That was a good one.
Withhold that.
I have one, but I hope it stands for doctor in my case.
But you're not male, so there's a.
I don't think you have to have a particular anatomy to actually hold the moniker. But yeah, I think I was going to bring up, and this is a thing I think maybe needs to be addressed too, because we talk about power and you talk about all of this, but I think that people sometimes misunderstand, like, oh, but this is good for you, and I'm the adult, or I'm the caregiver, or I'm the responsible party, and I know what's good for you. Yes.
I
And
know what's
I think
best.
that's a problem that I see everywhere. And I feel like it was interesting.
Mhm.
I went with a friend to children's swim class the other day, and it's okay. Here they take small children and they push them under the water. And I was like, that doesn't seem like something children can consent to. And I understand you're trying to teach them to swim, but is there a way to teach them to swim where we're not making them very upset and traumatized, and so that they're hitting their parent and crying and being like, this is the most horrific thing you've ever done to me? Like, how is that affecting the child? And maybe it's not affecting the child. Maybe that's my own trauma history coming out while I'm sitting there watching this happen. Maybe it isn't affecting the child. But what I would like to know definitively that it's not affecting the child in a negative way before I would put my child in the situation where I'm pushing their head underwater while they're crying and saying no. So I feel like that's a situation, and I'm so sorry, friend. I should have discussed this with you before I said it publicly. I don't want you to hear this and think that I am judging you. That is absolutely not. This is just one example of the many, many ways. I did so many things to my own daughter, which, again, apologies, daughter. Like Raven went through so much stuff that, like, I did so wrong, because I thought I was the mom and I knew what was best. And I needed to help her grow into an adult who could manage herself in particular ways. And even though I struggled with mental illness, and I am a person that tests on, I've never been formally diagnosed, but I test as autistic, and I have ADHD, and I have all of these disabilities and whatever else. Even though I have all those things and I don't like the way that people treat me, I treated my daughter the way that I don't like to be treated. And so I did it. I did the same thing. I did the same thing to my own child under the guise of knowing best. And yes, absolutely.
But you're admitting it. Like, the difference is you're admitting it and you're willing to accept
Mhm.
responsibility and you're willing to apologize. And that's the thing, is you have to be a safe space for people who are disabled. And if people don't feel safe coming to you or just gravitating toward you, or even knowing that you will self-reflect, they're not going to do it. And it speaks volumes.
Hello, and welcome to the Disability Tangent podcast, where we explore the diverse experiences and voices within the disability community. Our platform is more than just a podcast. It's a beacon of empowerment, education, and inclusivity.
We're reaching out to potential sponsors who believe in the power of storytelling to create positive change. By sponsoring the Disability Tangent podcast, you're not just supporting a show, you're investing in a movement that aims to break down barriers and amplify the voices of those often marginalized in mainstream media.
Your sponsorship not only helps us continue to produce high-quality, impactful content, but also demonstrates your commitment to inclusivity and diversity. Together, we can create a more inclusive world where everyone's story is heard and valued.
Join us in this important mission. Partner with the Disability Tangent podcast and be a part of this change.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of goes along with that idea. For me personally, in these cases, like we only operate with what we have, and what we have is the things that have been modeled for us. And sometimes it's hard to break out of that. Like, you think that's the right decision. And starting field a long time ago, I mean, symptom reduction, that was it. That was the goal. And everybody thought they were doing the right thing. And when people started questioning that, it was like, oh wait, I guess there is a different way. I guess we can actually connect with people. And but
Yeah.
what happens with that for me, then people then hide behind, maybe hide behind is too far. I don't know. I said it. Here we go. Um, the medical necessity component, and this goes not
Yeah.
just for things like ABA, but
Yeah.
other services too.
Yeah.
You know, as someone who is trained as an EMT myself, medical necessity for someone who's bleeding out is stop the bleeding, right? Medical necessity
Yes.
for someone who broke their femur is, hey, make sure the femoral artery isn't messed up. So trying to keep people alive, but then it
Mhm.
does get tricky when you go into things that don't directly have that sense of urgent survival, that
Right.
like if this does not happen, and certainly there are situations where psychological services are 100% needed to help the safety and well-being of an individual, but I feel like we tend to overdo that and say, oh, here's one tiny little sign of anything. All right, cool. Here's all of the things. Like now you have
Mhm.
to engage in 7 different kinds of behavioral services, and it's medically necessary.
Mhm.
And we have to say it's medically
Yep.
necessary, otherwise insurance won't cover it. And I
Yep.
keep running into that because then people think that this is necessary, therefore I must do it. And then there's almost this like saviorism component to it, and like infantilization of the
Mhm.
people that receive those services. And I just feel it's always felt odd to me, and that's a really hard thing to reconcile as a clinician, but also as an educator. Of, I know your test says you got to do this, but in reality it's way more nuanced and not as clear cut
Mhm.
as this thing is telling you it is.
Like a couple things based on that are coming to mind. The first one I think is that when we're taught about experimental analysis of behavior, when we're taught about Skinner's work, like remove yourself as a variable, you've got to be cold, but you can do that in a lab with animals when you've got pigeons in a box. You can remove yourself as a variable as much as humanly possible, right? Aside from whatever very brief interactions you have, but we're people working with people. It doesn't generalize. And I think a lot of people still are stuck on the we're a pure science, we're a hard science, what have you. So we can fully, we need to be that cold, like we don't affect the environment. It doesn't work. You can talk yourself blue in the face any which way to try to say that, but then you're also talking about like EMT stuff and medical necessity, like in that case, it stopped the bleeding. But a lot of times in anything mental health or psych related, what's needed is space because everything feels so urgent. And like what you
Exactly.
were talking about, Christy, with your daughter, you're in a space of crisis yourself, whether you know what your diagnostic labels are or not, you're just trying to stop the bleeding. And therefore,
Yeah.
parents shouldn't be judged for trying to stop the
Right.
bleeding. But they're told by experts to stop the bleeding when there is no blood, right? And that
Experts
like
in air quotes.
fear mongering, like
Yes.
look at Autism Speaks, if we can go there with their fear mongering. And I just rewatched the video for the first time in a few years because a friend had never seen it before, and she was like, "What are you talking about?" And I showed her, and it was, every time I watch it, it shakes me because it's
Yeah.
just terrible how it's like the Geico ad about chaos like that, but it's autism and not that dude. And the fear mongering that goes in, parents are also vulnerable, but I'll be clear, I am always there for the client first because they're the most vulnerable. They're a child,
Yeah.
which is a marginalized, oppressed community. They are a disabled child, lowest of the low on the rung of who gets protected, even though there's this guise of extreme protection. And so stop the bleeding, that we have to do something quick to save this person from, no, they need space. Breathe. Differences are okay. They challenge our cognition. They make us feel unsafe. They set off our amygdala, sets off our fight or flight. But what are we fighting? Difference and lack of understanding. So if you give yourself space to breathe and engage your prefrontal cortex, I'm talking this way because my crisis training was last week, and they talk about this a lot, like that inhibition piece, that crisis management, to let your hippocampus give the context, but you need time. And so a lot of times in the care we provide, stopping the bleeding, so to speak, means giving more space and being more patient and not acting quite so fast. Even though, but there's this aggression happening or self-injury happening. Yes, stop those moments. Let's focus there, but as far as behavioral intervention, wait, observe, see where the quote-unquote bleed is. If you like are just haywire, because it's psychology, the brain is a very sensitive organ, right? We don't have brain scans to show what damage we're doing if we act too rash.
And I think
anyway, I don't know.
Let's get back to safety and then move forward in safety, right? Because it's and I think that's excellent, that metaphor, the bleeding component, where sometimes we push up this urgency. And a parent myself now of young kiddos, it's especially with the training that I have, sometimes it's hard to have that space of, oh my gosh, this one thing, oh my gosh, I yelled at them like twice this week because I was overstressed. And all right, that's how ACEs starts. And it's like being hyper aware of like, how do we do that? How do we navigate that? And sometimes you get lost in the static of, sometimes I just need someone to come in and tell me what to do. And I'm saying that as like a behavioral professional and a parent and someone with disabilities. And sometimes I'm like, help, please. Can someone just do something about this? And I think that could be a very dangerous thing when then parents say, oh, here's this organization, here's this approach, here's this medication, here's this whatever, and this is even outside of behavior analysis too. And this happens everywhere where here's the solution. And it's not necessarily sold as a quick fix, but it's sold as like this needs to be a part of your life. And in some cases it might be, but that fading presence is not considered. I don't know. All therapists are supposed to work themselves out of a job, right? Like you're not supposed to be there forever at the same level of an intensity. There's certainly people I work with now that I've been with for, 10, 12 years, but the people that I stay in touch with, it's like checking in every other month. And it's not like, what goals should we be working on now? It's, what's going on in your life? Like, how's your person advocating for themselves now? What does that look like? And, which looked way different than when this individual was like 2. And
we grow
up.
I
think there are some things that I think are long-term things. That's fine. But yeah, it shifts over time and it becomes a different sort of relationship. I think my therapist and I should maybe specify my psychotherapist, not my trauma therapist or my other therapist or my other therapist. my psychotherapist. Sorry, I feel like I'm getting some recognition here from some of you who are like, oh yeah, I get that. Same. Right?
My community of support. Yeah.
It takes a village.
It takes a village.
To survive life, not to the kid.
Yes.
We're still the kids.
To have your mental health
Yes.
together to function as a human. Yes. So my psychotherapist and I have just shifted into, let's start our session with mindfulness. Let's just do a time of meditation or reflection or whatever. Let's just do some ACT-related stuff. Let's do some perspective taking. Let's take some time and breathe. Let's focus on a word and do the breathing. And I feel like that's fabulous because I need that, right? It's hard for me to just do that on my own. But that's not where we started 2 years ago. That's where we are today. And I think that's really important to understand that, as things shift and change, which they should, then the relationship can shift and change as well. And I think that it's an odd thing working in some of these areas because you get paid. Okay. You don't get paid for healthy people. You get paid for people that have problems. And that's, I think, another challenge within the system, particularly in the United States, where there's more money to be had if I can point to a problem and say that I'm fixing it, but then I have to continue to fix it, right? I recently watched this show on Netflix, The Program. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's a little bit traumatizing. It might be hard for some of us to watch. It's a lot to take in.
It's a lot.
This talks about, it's still happening today, but particularly like 10, 15 years ago, there were these programs that would kidnap your kid in the middle of the night, would just drag them out of bed, take them
Oh, I
to
have seen
some
it.
location, and then they would have this points system that was very loosely based on reward and punishment. Just one little tiny bit of behavioral training, right? One tiny bit of it. No assessment, no actual psychiatrists or therapists or behavior therapists or anybody was involved in them usually, but just this reward and punishment thing. But the focus was to make sure that they were constantly punished, because as soon as they left the program, you didn't get the money from the parents any longer. It was about making money. It wasn't about helping these people.
Yeah.
And they really were students that many of them had no problems to begin with. And my suspicion is, they didn't talk about this specifically, but my suspicion is that many of these young people had either, I don't know whether diagnosed or undiagnosed neurodivergence. I believe that, just given the things that they were expressing as
Yes.
how they couldn't get along here, or this was a problem for them, they couldn't focus, they turned to this or that. That sounded very much like people who probably were dealing with some undiagnosed or whatever kind of neurodivergence. So I feel like these were people that needed
And
assistance,
so-
and instead they got abuse. And that's really disturbing. But if they were healed, if they finished the program and they left, then the money dried up. So the goal was to create a system that they couldn't win the game. That's frightening to me. That's how our system works, right?
Yeah.
Is if you're unwell, you're worth more to the system.
Yeah, and that's something like, how do we, as like people that are advocating, as people that are researching and educating and doing clinical work, I don't know, how do you all reconcile information like that? Like for me, it's trying to have people see those components, right? I'm definitely at the behest of what certification board allows me to teach in some ways, and there's a minimum to teach. I always teach a little bit extra beyond that because there's other things that we need to know. And there's definitely those like difficult conversations that we have in class, really challenging that and challenging people's practicum sites and challenging people's work. And again, this is behavior analysis, this is clinical psychology, this is other students that I have contact with. And sometimes the system allows for that and it's seen as cutting edge, but sometimes there's where we have those conversations and then we're ostracized for that. And I don't know, and personally, I don't know if that's my own social unawareness or like what's going on with that, because I don't know when that fall happens, where it's in one moment, oh, thank you so much for doing the inclusivity thing, this is really great, students should really know this. And then the next moment our program gets slammed because it's, oh, we're trying to teach too much and you're hating on this particular field. And it's, no, that's not what we're doing. And it seems like so much of this work is that perception component of it. But I don't know, have y'all had similar experiences or?
Yes. It's actually interesting. I've been doing a lot of self-reflection lately, and it's really hard for those of us with perspective on the society issues and the way everything is set up, because we're the ones who are tired, we're the ones who hurt, we're the ones who are not able to be heard in a way. Like the students that we were talking about with the program, they are communicating in a way that is considered abnormal, or they are speaking out in different ways that just don't conform to society. And the problem is, like, when we're speaking out or when we are trying to take steps, take action, they may not be heard, they may not be received, we may not be taken seriously. There could be lots of different components here. And my first thing that I try to do now is I try to say, have I accommodated myself to where I have the capacity, the fortitude, the drive? My social justice bone's always there and always twitching, but I may not always have the spoons for it. I may not always have the resources for it. And so I have to self-identify, are my needs met? And I still don't fully know how to accommodate myself. That is a journey. And I think that is such a big building block for especially disabled people to fight this battle is, are you caring for yourself first? And talking about accommodations is a whole other thing, but you may not even know the full extent of your accommodations. So talking about parenting or behavioral services, if you don't know your own boundaries, it's really hard for you to model those for your children. It's really hard to model those for the kids you support. And if you're both struggling, no one's needs are getting met. And I don't know. I think it all comes back to that personally.
Yeah, like when I think I have seen the program. I had to look up pictures because I'm bad with names, real bad. I explain this too. But something that brings to mind in clinical practice is, what excuse do we see when people do questionable procedures? Well, the parent asked for it. One of the people that was in that show was there because the stepmom didn't like her and convinced the dad to send her to this program, but she didn't need that level of support. She just the stepmom to not treat her terribly. And not that a lot of people that we work with are in exactly that boat, but we can't just run a program or do a particular protocol or target a particular behavior because the parent says so. Does the parent have the education and background and the skill set that understands how much of a blunt instrument the tools we use can be? And then it's our job to make sure that we're addressing the underlying need. Okay, why is the parent asking for this? And then providing that nuanced care to meet the actual need without exerting power and coercion on a vulnerable child, but also recognizing the complicated position the parent's in. I'm just a year into a PhD program, and so I'm still learning on that front, Robin, what you talk about with students and things like that, well, the student in this practicum, that's what their supervisor decided was an ethical course of treatment. So how dare you comment on the ethical nature of whatever the thing is? I'm like, well, isn't that the point of the practicum, to give feedback so you have multiple routes for learning about how to practice as a behavior analyst? I'm only supposed to comment on the specific, oh, you're writing a consent form or something like that. Like, only comment on the consent form aspects, but leave the intervention aside. I'm like, but why are they in practicum? What am I here for? So, like, challenging, and I agree with you that, like, where's that shoe gonna drop? Like, disability justice, the discrete DEI idea, whatever acronym we want to use, there's only so much patience for the work that we do in institutions, because the institution wants to only do as much work as they feel like they should have to retain their credibility and relevance, to retain their profit at the end of the day. And so they'll tolerate us at arm's length. And like what you're saying about accommodating yourself, like, I know that any institution that I'm at is not going to value me as far as they can throw me. And so I don't value them as far as I can throw them. To know what system you're in, reserve your spoons. I've been in situations in a past work environment where I did put my full weight behind something and I thought it was great, and I got discriminated against.
Yes.
And I lost an entire community of people that I'd worked for years because some woman didn't like working with a non-binary autistic person and believed that implicit bias was my religious belief, which is a mouthful. And you're going to get that. And that person wasn't a behavior analyst. That person was an operations person. But behavior analysts that own the company allowed it. So no system is absolved. It's all part of the same thing.
I think people get caught in that, not knowing what to do in those situations, or especially with many, many recent events going on abroad, going on with various... I don't want to get too far into that. So that's a whole nother podcast. That's a whole nother episode. People say, is not my place because I don't share that experience or that lived community with people. And I want people to tell me that information. But then they say, well, if I'm supposed to do the work, I don't know how to get the information in the right way. And then again, as I said before, some people get lost in that static, and then they don't know how to engage in discourse. So then they don't engage. And in many cases, that's worse. Like, we checked off the box of quote unquote reasonable accommodation, and this person is still failing because not because of their own personal ability or inability to do whatever, but when they say this is what I need to be successful, and that's only 2 steps away from what they're currently getting or being allowed, and then being told, oh, we can't give everything to everybody. So yeah, I know that, but
why not?
let the
But everyone could benefit from accommodations ultimately.
Exactly.
Like, that's, people say we can't, and I'm like, okay, what's the answer?
But
What's
you
the
can.
reason? And the 9 times out of 10, I'm not a betting person. I don't think I've ever gambled in my life, except
Or like
kernels over
penny
a campfire.
poker.
That doesn't count. They're being thrown away anyway.
I don't know. I feel
Nobody's
like that
actually
counts.
taking
That's
it. You're anyway. Beside the point. But I'm not a gambling person. But I would wager that 9 times out of 10, it's money,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's somebody and that we live in an exploitative society. But it's the top 1%. There are no fight me
Right.
that are
Agree
Except for
to be there.
each other. We're fighting for
studies have
scraps.
shown that it's
And-
no more expensive. That it's no more expensive to give accommodations for people. Companies don't go broke giving accommodations. That's not a thing that ever happens. And so the expense
No.
is not a valid reason for not giving accommodations. Most accommodations cost less than $5,000
Exactly.
per year. Less than $5,000 per year. Most people are giving Christmas bonuses to their regular employees that are far in excess of, not each employee, but like many companies are giving a Christmas bonus that is far in excess of what they would give for per year to me as an accommodation. It just costs a little bit of money. And if you pay it once, sometimes it can help many, many, many people, right? If you pay for dictation software, you just need 1 license. You don't need 107 license for 107 people. Like your company can buy a license and put it on more than 1 computer potentially. So there are things that like only cost you 1 time, and that helps many people. So yeah, like it's the curb cut situation, right? You put it in, it helps more people than you thought it would help. And so I find it ridiculous when people are like, oh no, we can't afford to take you on. Oh, okay, that's ridiculous. You can pay people $100,000 per year, but you can't pay $5,000 per year to get me the software that I need to not utilize my hand. Or you can't let me work from home. That costs you nothing. Nothing.
Oh yeah, that one gets me.
Yes.
Nothing.
And
Yeah, especially
but
after
then-
COVID. Come on.
nobody wants
Right.
to work in person anymore. And I'm like, the accommodations that I need largely are related to my being hard of hearing. Like, I'm just asking for you to not have a meeting on a software that you don't pay enough for. I didn't even ask for you to pay for the higher level of Zoom to be able to have captioning. I just
Right.
asked you to use Google Meet because it's automatically there, and that is like too much. But I just asked you to keep communication in writing because I have a social disability. Like, it doesn't cost you anything. But then you might get caught. in
It's
a paper
just
trail where you
ridiculous
don't
to
want
me.
it.
Yeah. The excuses
You know,
are
so it
just
costs you your
excuses. There's no evidence that it costs more to hire disabled people. It's not true. It's just absolutely not true. We perform and sometimes outperform non-disabled people. And it costs you very little to put in accommodations. And I think the same about educational institutions. There's no reason, absolutely no reason that I can't have more time per the semester. And even if there is a reason, right? Yes.
Yeah, the
Like
arbitrary
this is the end of the semester. You can't have more days than X to finish this. Why not? And if you want to say, oh, it's the federal government because your financial aid has to pay for X, then let's talk to the federal government, right? Let's get Joe Biden on the phone. Okay, maybe not Joe Biden on the phone, but let's talk to someone about why that's a problem, right? And say, okay, but we're actually, as a country, then keeping disabled people from getting an education. Is that what we want as a country? No, I think that we talked about this some years ago and decided that we deserve equal educational opportunities. So why are we not getting them? Let's figure it out. So I keep thinking this is just excuse making because we don't want to bother. We don't want to bother. It's not about money.
Mhm.
It's not about performance. It's really
Mhm.
about, I don't want to think about this. And I keep thinking to myself, if I have to deal with this, why don't you have to deal with it? It's just your privilege.
Well, they will someday.
Yeah.
Because disability is the only marginalized class that everybody,
Yes, we have
if they live
talked
long
about
enough,
this
will
before.
fall
Yeah.
into one day. It's the only one that you can't escape unless. But people don't believe that. They're like, it's not coming for me. I'm like, friend, you are one hard fall away on a rainy day where you're like,
Yeah.
your doormat slipped out under your feet and you hit your head on the ground. Guess
Do
what?
you know how many tripping hazards?
I
Do
mean,
you know
that
how
wouldn't
many
be
tripping
great.
hazards I
Thankfully, it didn't hit
count
my
per
head,
day
but-
out and about? Because I am afraid of them.
Do you know how many tripping hazards I actually trip over per day?
You know how many non-tripping hazards you trip over? Just my
What?
niece do something called Bambi legs, where it paints the picture like when Bambi's fresh out the womb and the knees are just buckling. That's what my do.
My dog just
Yep,
did that
yep.
and
For
That's
fun.
relatable.
ripped his ligament. Dog, a little Havanese can step outside, slip, and rip his ligaments. Y'all can have the
Mhm.
same experience, I promise. So it's coming. It's coming for you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think especially after something like COVID, how many people are like, yeah, I'm totally fine. And oh, no, now I have this long lasting heart condition because I'm a COVID long
Right.
hauler. And
Mm-hmm.
I think people are very quick to say, if you have a disability, you just got to figure it out. And it's like, all right, cool. So we also have this thing called short term disability and FMLA. And there are systems in place for things like that. But it only really seems to benefit things that are quote unquote temporary. And
Yeah.
you only get a certain number of help and assistance with that because they know that there's a particular end to it. And I know that resources are finite, like totally understand that and respect that because we have to operate now. But then the policies that are made should be focused more on, could we just make the environment a little bit more accessible and a little bit more actually universal design? Not, hey, look, it's universal design. We have one ramp and subtitles only. And that's good as a starting point, but that should be in everything because then
Yep.
we don't have to do any other. We talk about that in behavior analysis, right? If you change the environment enough that the person contacts those contingencies on their own, it builds trust and advocacy, and you don't have to do a behavior plan if the person can contact the environment more successfully with the tools that they have available to them. As a professional and as an educator and a researcher, like that's the kind of stuff I want to see more of, and we try to push out there and not just be written off as, oh, you're just saying that because you have this history of disability. Is that not enough?
But
That
like,
should be
what
Yeah.
other
enough
credentials
reason.
do I need? Shit.
you're biased because you have lived experience. You need to be able to leave it at the door to do your job well. I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm an integrated human being. I've worked hard for the confidence to understand how to like utilize both my lived experience and clinical educational experience under an umbrella of clinical expertise. And I don't like, expertise is like a starting point, like mastery, like not using it in like I know everything, because I don't. I
Yeah,
will
I know
never.
what you
I'm
mean.
one single human. But because I know people get iffy about that phrase, but I'm like, clinical expertise. There you go. There's a phrase. Like, we all have our niches, no matter how generalist we want to be. But it how many people are like, I've seen this work with so many kids, so that should count. Where's your paper? You keep asking me where's mine. Have you written one? No.
That's a really good point.
Okay. But just
Yeah.
because mine is based on lived experience and yours is, but hey, my impact, and you know why I'm getting a PhD? So I can work on getting that into research, because people
Yep.
won't do the studies on lived experience
Mhm.
because they want to maintain the ivory tower. And I'm like, I'll climb out the outside if you make me, but I ain't here to
Yeah.
uphold it.
And that was my
Yeah.
reason for getting the doctorate too.
Ping-pong.
Mhm.
People won't take you
Ping-pong is
seriously, and
outside.
it's the oppressive systems at play, and that's just the nature of what it is, because we are the demographic who we
Yep.
don't have the resources to fight back,
Mhm.
and
We're
it
socially
sucks.
impaired.
Yeah,
I
it
say
sucks.
that
It really does.
sarcasm,
Yeah.
full on
Yeah.
sarcasm.
And
I
to
mean,
go back to your point, Alexandra, you were talking about the parents wanted to work on this goal and whatever. That's a system of oppression as well. And we're
Mhm.
talking about individuals who are most likely to engage in any form of abuse toward a child. It comes directly from the parents, most likely. And so, if we're talking about all these different levels of oppression, like it's
Mhm.
perpetuated throughout all stages of life. And that is what
Yep.
bothers me. And unfortunately,
Yeah.
it's really hard to dig out of. So,
mhm.
no
Yep.
good
And
answers.
and it's not something that's factored in, I feel like, to because I feel like at some level there's well, at any level, I should say, there's a level of coercion and power
Yes.
dynamic in any relationship everywhere. And
Mhm.
Yeah.
so I don't think that, and I know that nobody's suggesting this, but and I also want listeners to hear this as not, I'm not saying we should completely eliminate this because I know that's not possible, right? That there's always going to be
Yeah.
dynamic, but
We
it
could
has,
want to.
yeah, yeah,
That's
exactly.
different. Yeah.
The want is definitely
Once,
there.
once in reality.
On part 3 of this podcast, we talk about, but but the piece that I keep coming back to on that is how do we factor that in? We're creating
Mm.
that assessment or we're creating that paper, that research, and we say, are the stimuli something that is actually representative? Who is reading this? Oh, we're doing this research. Who's represented? Oh, I'm doing this assessment. Okay. Did you think to check in with the person that's actually receiving the services? How are we doing that? Who's in
So
charge of
simple.
making the decisions for this person and what
It's
do they
so
need?
simple.
Yeah.
The social
It's
validity
so
measure is
simple.
often the parent being asked, was this valid for your family? Where's the social validity where you ask, and where's the
Yeah.
consent measure for the actual kid? And
Right.
I don't
Exactly.
use, no matter the age, they're two, how can they consent? Well, they're
They
going to
can
show you,
consent.
are you seeing meltdown
Yeah.
behavior? They're withdrawing consent and
Exactly.
you're ignoring it.
Exactly. They're not
Because
escaping or distancing or they're happy, relaxed, and engaged, right?
Yes.
Consent. Oh my gosh. We don't need words for that. What a great thing.
Well, and
your
that's
body.
where allyship comes into, because if we don't have the resources or if we don't have the spoons or however you want to say it, we really need people when we can't play neurotypicality or play non-disabled, which is what we do when we mask or when we use
For those of us
accommodations
who
to
can.
perform at a level that we are generally disadvantaged at. That is, we need people to fall back on that can help carry
Mhm.
that battle for
Yeah.
us. Yeah.
But it's hard to find those people that aren't going to white fragility, abled fragility. Like,
Right.
there's a parallel there. People want to be assured that they're an ally. They want to claim that title for themselves. And anybody who
Yeah.
is who is self-labeling themselves as an ally, again, not a betting person, 9 out of 10 times, they're probably not.
Yeah.
Because they're fighting so hard to be seen as one. You don't have to fight to be seen as one if you are.
Right.
Is it an identity or is it a label? And I think those two things are different. But like what you're saying, like how do we actually do, like how do we integrate those changes? It's a lot of work, but like we've got to
Mhm.
actually do the thing. We need an assessment, let's write one. We need more research on lived
Yeah.
experience, let's do it. We need more people talking about lived experience and neurodiversity. Let's keep talking. We need people to do CEUs. We need people to write new diagnostic criteria. Okay, let's collaborate over here with psychologists who are qualified for that kind of thing and get them to write it in collaboration with lived experience educators. A lot of people are like, well, the elephant is too big, it's never going to change. BS, one bite at a time.
Yeah.
We just got to start doing it, but people just want to keep talking. And there's room for
Right.
talking. We have a lot of talking left, but people don't want to actually do the work because it's hard.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
they just want to get credit for talking. And I'm like, where's
Well,
your receipt?
I don't want to speak for you, Alexandra, but I feel like we can speak to each other pretty well at this point because we're very in sync. But like we've had conversations together where we talk about we're going to have to play the game. So how are we going to do this? We need to do the thing. We wrote a skill assessment protocol because we didn't like the way the other skill assessment protocols looked. And we want to understand more about this occurrence that's happening with particular divisions of or particular demographics of autistic individuals. Let's do a research study. And so we're trying to play the game. I guess you can say, but doing it in our own way with our own, we're both gamers with our own skins on those and
It's like
or our own
the
templates or
illusion of playing
framework.
the game.
Yeah.
Like, because I'm not playing the game. There is no game to me. There is a game to other people. It's like
Yes.
The Matrix is a
Their
great
game.
analogy. We're unplugged. We know that the game is bunk, but we've got to plug in periodically to get people out.
We play their game.
Yes. I don't know, but yeah.
I
same.
think that's
Agreed.
interesting, the way that you're talking about it in a leadership class where there was this game that we, like a literal game that we played, and it was rigged, and it was like this sort of like Gold Stars game. I don't remember what it was called. I might look it up later so that we can include it in the notes, but it was like, it was rigged, but it was meant to teach you about leadership and about your ability to manage, right, stuff that was coming up. But it was specifically meant to privilege some people and to put other people at a disadvantage. So there was no way to win, right? There was people that started at the top, stayed at the top, except for like maybe one person that could move up. And then the rest of the people who were disadvantaged were just disadvantaged. And it was so interesting to see because some people became very cutthroat about the game, right? And they were just like, ha! And some people got really angry. Like they were very angry, and they were just like, I'm gonna make this work. And I stopped playing. I literally just walked to another part of the room, sat down, and started reading a book. And I was like, I'm not going to be a part of this game. This game is not fair, and I don't like it. And I sat somewhere in the other side of the room, and about 20 minutes later, finally someone realized that I wasn't playing. And they came over to my side of the room, and we started having a conversation. And it was really interesting because I was the first person to just say, that game's not fair. I'm not going to play. And I think that was like 95% of that was because this was my lived experience. I've seen this happen. I know that I'm not a part of that. That doesn't work for me. And I can't win it. I know that I can't win it. And I can pretend, I can mask, I can try, but I'm never going to win it. And so I just gave up and I walked away. And so it's so interesting to hear you talk about this because it brings up that memory of this game where I was like, nope, sorry, I'm not going to put my energy into that because that's not going to work. There's no way that's going to work. And I feel like that's just how I live my life now. Where I've gotten to the point where with much therapy and many, many years of experience that it's just how I am trying to live my life where I'm like, you know what? I can't play that game. I need to find a way to live that is outside of that system because every time I try to dip back into the system, it wounds me again, and I can't keep doing it to myself. I can't keep thinking, here's a way to be normal, Christy. Here's a way to not feel like a disabled person. Here's a way to like fit in. Here's a way to find a community that supports me. No, like you can't just jump into that game and think that it's going to fit you. It's not. I have to find a way to build something on my own. And that's like the disability community, the advocacy community has been that for me. Yes, there's not maybe as perfect as I would like it to be, but definitely more so than anything else that I've found is just this community of disability advocacy because at least that's a bunch of people who have been trying to play the societal game and have been shunned over and over. So at least we understand one another. And so that's given me some respite. But yeah, I feel like I can't dip in and try to pull people out anymore. Like I've exhausted that even because there's been so much damage done by society that I just can't even care who's locked into that anymore. I can't. I have to only care about what's happening to me because I won't survive any more of that abuse. And I hate that. I really hate that. But it's also become my reality that I just need to step outside of the system. I need to live as much as I can
Mhm.
Yeah.
somewhere else.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like this podcast is a perfect example of that, though, Christy. This is a space that all of us can interact and share and disseminate in a way that doesn't have to be moderated, for lack of a better term. There's not, Robin, to your point, and I say this also as a journal editor myself, there's not quote unquote experts that
Right.
say, yes, this is the way that I want to perceive, this is the way that I want to push. And this, although there's a lot of pieces to this, and we work really hard on this, and Christy, especially you work really hard on this as well. And I am proud of this work, and I'm proud of Alexandra and Robin for coming on and talking about this and being willing to disseminate this information outside of those quote unquote channels, right? It's easy for people to say, I listen to NPR and I listen to Code Switch and I listen to all these other podcasts in that manner. And I think those are the things that people want to hear, the actual meat of the information.
Mhm.
And then when you want to know more, then you dig into it. And,
Yeah.
we're here to spark that and say, hey, these are issues. There's also happiness in this too. And I know, Christy, that's something you and I talked about a while ago, where we don't always want to be pointing to the negative, but even in this conversation, we've also talked about how positive these experiences have been for us to have that lived experience and say, you know what, why don't you think about it this way? And those aha moments that students have and people that we work with, because it's not all bad and it can work. It's hard, but when it hits really well. And that person then tells other people
Yeah.
about that. And I'm hoping that this work, we can continue to do that and spread that in a way that is inclusive and makes sense and is raw and feels good, while also pointing to a lot of things that have not been good at the same time. And there's room for both of those truths. And
Yep.
I'm really,
Both
Totally.
and.
yeah.
Yeah.
People want things to be very binary. They want things to be
Yeah.
good, bad, wrong. The black and white is racist in origin. They want that dichotomy. They want that split. It's really, there's a lot of things that are neutral. There's a lot of things that are in the gray area. There's a lot of things that are both good and bad. We all hope. There's times, like we were alluding to that D designation on the BCBA to deserve that moniker. Everybody has the propensity to be good at dark and light and to have good in them and bad in them. And it's about how you navigate and how you align your values. I'm not like an ACT person personally, but that idea of values alignment lands well with me. It's okay to honor both. It doesn't have to be what it is now. It can change. Will enough people decide to change it with us to make it salvageable? Will we be able to put the fire out? Stop the bleeding?
Yeah.
I just got the shivers. Just the progression of that and where we sit with this. If we're, obviously we can talk about this for a long time and probably will. If y'all can leave people with, what do you think in your respective positions that you have seen so far as students, clinicians, researchers, educators, community activists, what would you suggest people can do to start taking those tiny steps towards massive change?
That is a heavy question.
Mhm.
Take your time. I'll edit out the big space.
Yeah. I don't know. Leave it in there. That's because it's
When you're in your car and there's like a 7-minute quiet space, that might not be the most beneficial for podcasting. However, yeah.
True. You can at least leave in.
Yes,
in
I will. I will be like,
acknowledgement that a pregnant pause occurred.
I can be like, pregnant, and now a pregnant pause. Well, folks, it looks like we're nearing the end of today's episode, but fear not.
That's right. While we've covered a lot of ground in this episode, our conversation with our amazing researchers is far from over.
Join us next time as we continue this captivating discussion. diving even deeper into their experiences and insights.
We'll be back with more hard-hitting perspectives on the field of disability research, so stay tuned.
Until then, remember the journey towards greater understanding and inclusivity is ongoing.
Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the Disability Tangent Podcast. As hosts of the Disability Tangent Podcast, we love hearing from our listeners. Your thoughts, feedback, and questions are what keep our podcast going and growing.
So if you've been inspired, moved, or even challenged by anything you've heard on our show, we want to hear from you. Share your stories, your insights, and your questions with us by emailing disabilitytangent@gmail.com.
Whether you're sharing a personal story, suggesting a topic for a future episode, or simply want to say hello, we're here and ready to listen.
So don't be shy. Drop us an email at disabilitytangent@gmail.com and let's keep the conversation going. Your voice matters, and we can't wait to hear from you.
That's all for today, folks. Until next time, remember to stay engaged, stay curious, and above all, stay connected. Thank you for listening. What's our email again?
disabilitytangent@gmail.com.
You said blue.
Oh my gosh.
Awesome. Follow us and support us on Patreon for
The many, 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 many bloopers, errors, poor judgment moments,
You
etc.
like what we do now. You like what we do now, imagine what we can do with more support.
Imagine how much fucking up we can do with your dollars behind us. We can have a whole bunch of blooper reels. Wait, no, that sounds wrong. If you pay us, we can screw up a lot more often. Isn't that what jobs are for?
It's the only reason.
I don't know. This is why I don't have any jobs.
I think we found it. I think. Biscuits.
Chrissy is not unemployable because of her disabilities. She is unemployable because she is just not good at work.